Okay, so yesterday I finally picked up another one of Ruskin's masterpieces. This one is The Lamp of Beauty, and I had read an excerpt of this lamp. To set the stage, so Ruskin was a theorist in the early to mid to late, 19th century. He was born, 1819, died 1900, so for the grand part of the 19th century, and certainly not early. And his whole shtick is one that I've become very attached to, which is that Gothic architecture is the best, that human done designs is the best. And ultimately though, aside from generalizing his writing, which I think definitely does not give it the credit that it's due, he cares a lot about people creating art and architecture that brings good into the world. That's ultimately his quest. So he was writing, when the Industrial Revolution was happening, and he was seeing all of these things around him becoming mechanized, and later after his death, thankfully he wasn't there to see it, no, I'm joking, but the assembly line came, mass production, all these things, and he saw that the artisan was decreasing, and he wasn't just purely a history file or whatever you'd call it, a historicist, because he loved modern painters. He wrote a whole treatise on how modern painters, which we would call them 19th century painters today, which is the Romantics, really, were the best. And he has a whole, it's too much to summarize into something very concise, but the book that I had read of his was called The Seven Lamps of Architecture. Now he actually, when he died, he had left hundreds and hundreds of pages of writing that had not been published or had only been published in short excerpts, and people have been ever since then trying to catalog it and publish it in excerpted, streamlined ways. So when I read The Seven Lamps of Architecture, it was very much so boiled down. It was like a 200-page read, and this is obviously, per the titular phrase, as I've been told I like to say, about the lamp of beauty. And for this lamp, it's kind of pretty obvious. It is about creating things that are beautiful, and that I actually don't have a super strong grasp on this because we haven't touched on it in the book yet, that bring about moral good and pleasure in life because of their beauty. And I'm not here to super dive into what I've been reading because I've only been 25 pages in, and so far it's talked about power and truth, which are his other two lamps, and some general thoughts of his on modern painters, but not enough for me to speak to this. This is how far in I am. So anyhow, I guess I'm really coming on here today because I want to talk about my evolving thoughts on why we put artwork in museums. Because I think I've been a little bit polemical in the past, probably not on here, but just in general, in having some very harsh ideas about modern art and about what constitutes good art. And some of those I'll hold my tongue right now on what I think, but I think that I have to stop denying to myself that all forms of contemporary modern art don't speak to people because they're non-figurative. Fortunately, I have been told that is just factually incorrect, and even though I cannot emotionally relate to them, others can, and that's the important thing. So, and thinking about that, I was reassessing. I was like, well, why does it matter so much that we have good artwork to me in museums? And why do I get kind of, when I see a Pollock or something Pollock-esque on the wall of a museum, but why do I stop and stare and love the furniture section in art museums or the clothing section? those two, wouldn't they be kind of be comparable, because they're both, you know, not necessarily figurative usually ever, and they both seem purely decorative to at least me. So why do I care so much about pretty things from 2,000 years ago, but not from 40 years ago necessarily? And I guess what really sparked my thoughts about this is in the Roman section of the museum that I was at, there is this amazing beaker, and I'm pulling up a photo of it right now. I was shocked when I read the date. At first I thought that they had just put it in to be like an in conversation piece, but it's an Imperial Roman piece, and it looks like something that you would only really be able to find today. I didn't even know they could make stuff like this back then. But it's got this incredible rainbow glaze over it, and I mean, it's a perfect beaker, despite the fact that it was obviously handmade or hand blown. I don't know what the terminology would be. It's perfectly symmetrical, and when you walk around it, it has this incredible finish so that the colors change. And you know, they go, you know, if you're standing in front of it at the front, it's like this vibrant, rich, delicious orange, but then you move around to the side and it kind of, I don't know, it seeps into or molds into this great purple, but it's a very sunsetty purple. I mean, it really truly is a sunset in painted form. It's amazing. And I guess what really strikes me about that, and what strikes me about these little inconsequential objects like furniture pieces or maybe hairpins or jewelry that I've always really been drawn to in museums above all else, is the fact that it's a very beautiful product of someone's imagination, and that someone, in the case of this beaker specifically, is, you know, is someone sitting in an unmarked grave somewhere, if their bones are even still, have not yet, you know, crumbled to dust. And despite the fact that there is no way to reach back and ever know anything about the artisan that came up with this incredibly lush beaker, I can sit and appreciate their imagination and the beauty that they wanted to bring into this world, like 1,000 years later? I mean, more than that, 2,000 years later. It's truly, I mean, the longevity of ideas and their ability to inspire virtue or inspire, you know, bad things far after the person that created them has died is such a gift. And that also made me think of something that I had seen the other day on Pinterest. It was just one of those, you know, vintage advertisements for something, and this one was pretty messed up. It was a vintage ad. At first I was like, you know, laughing at it, but then I was like, ugh. It was a vintage advertisement for these coasters that had Marilyn Monroe's leaked nudes on them, and it was like, you know, it was like, be the best host by putting these out, or make your buddy really happy by bringing this to a barbecue or something. And at first it was like, oh, like that's kind of funny, but you know, then I was sitting there and it was very, I realized it was quite, maybe I'm getting a little bit, I don't think I'm being too dogmatic in this though, no, but it was quite debased for me to be finding that funny when that was, you know, having your, like, I would never laugh at someone having their nudes leaked today. That's a messed up thing inherently. But anyways, my point is, this piece of media, this product of someone's imagination, was able to make me do something bad, in the sense that I was laughing at this immense suffering that this woman went through, and also was able to, in a sense, prolong her suffering by humiliating her again. I had like never seen her nudes. I just knew they were leaked because like a history class or whatever, or I don't know, like I'm putting it like nudes leaked like in that sort of phrasing, but whatever. But prolong her suffering and kind of resurrect her humiliation to some rando me, you know, like 70 years later after the fact that it had happened. And that's just about the longevity of images and their ability to inspire virtue or inspire sin, really. And I'm just looking at my little notes here because I find myself getting a little bit off track. And I guess part of the reason why such maybe trite little things in museums seem particularly important to me also, and I think to people generally, is because they inspire, you know, in a very tame way, or really provoke feelings of, you know, jealousy, but not really jealousy, but it's like, oh, like I want to own that. Like I would love to own that little Roman beaker. And, you know, in that same way, like there's in our first gifts collection, which is basically, it's the foundational donations that the museum received, but put on display to kind of like talk about the museum's origins and stuff. There's this incredible sugar bowl that has these little strawberries all around the rim and this little dancing line at the bottom, and it's very, you know, it's very pleasant to look at. And it's like, yeah, like I would love to have a sugar bowl like that. I would love for the plates that I eat off of in the morning to have little carved strawberries on them, you know, right after I finished pouring my milk out of the, you know, rainbow incredible beaker. And if I had the capacity to create things like that, I would. But I think over time, the kind of inundation with all of those beautiful things in museums has led me to be, you know, kind of go out and try to decorate my life in that sort of maybe fanciful, maybe unnecessary way. But ultimately, I think it's good to have those things in museums because they inspire pleasure, which sometimes, and I think in this case, the pleasure at seeing something beautiful done by someone else, which also leads, for me at least, the contemplation of mortality, is a very virtuous thing. And I think that all artwork should have, if it's going to touch on, whether, you know, regardless of what subject matter it's touching on, I think is best when it has that sort of duality. When it has a duality where, you know, part of it speaks to something that inspires joy in you, and then maybe something else that speaks to something a little bit more serious, a little bit more heavy. Like I looked at this Roman beaker, and first it was like, whoa, that was made by the Romans. That's so cool. It's so beautiful. It's so intricate. How did they make something that, you know, just seemingly to modern sensibilities in that time period? How do they have the technology to make those incredible colors, and how did it survive this long? How did those colors stay so vibrant over the course of centuries? How did they retouch it if it was retouched before it was put on display? But it didn't look like that because part of it was broken. So I think I was looking at the original paint, which is very exciting. And, you know, yet at the same time, then I was able to take a step back and be like, the person that created this thing that is inspiring me so much right now is long dead and irrevocably forgotten, and I'm going to end up that way as well someday. And that's, you know, why shouldn't I should probably go out into the world and create a little bit of beauty that will outlast me. And it reminded me of something that I'd been reading about this museum's first director, actually. There was a great quote from him in a newspaper where he said that very few people will be able to change the world, but everyone has the ability to affect positive, you know, beauty in their smallest spheres of influence. And I really, really liked that phrase, because then, he went on to list like a couple different things that you could do. And for him, that was being a museum director. And this artisan, whoever they were, 2,000 years ago, was creating this beautiful thing for their small sphere of influence, which was the customers that they were serving. And they didn't have to make it so beautiful and so decorated. If they wanted to save the money on the extra glaze, they could have made it something that wouldn't last that long, something that, it's like, yeah, it'll be rainbow and shiny, but like for 20 years instead of, I'm gonna put in the extra effort so this thing lasts a long time. And then their smallest sphere of influence, because of that choice, driven by whatever motives, expanded to include me, a complete stranger living in a time period they literally could have never imagined. Like, they never could have imagined the idea of even a museum. So me being in that museum, that institution that they couldn't even fathom, seeing their artwork behind a glass case, and just to add more ridiculousness to it for them, something they really couldn't imagine. I was wearing like a t-shirt and shorts, like a girl wearing a t-shirt, like it's just in this how about the fact that I'm in America, in this landmass that they couldn't even wrap their heads around if they had tried. Because they had made the decision to create something beautiful and long lasting, their artwork got to have impacts far beyond the scheme of anything that I could have imagined. And I think that's true not just for art. I think that, it's like every little thing counts, but really every little thing does count. And creating something beautiful or something inspiring or something virtuous will always count and will always have impact far beyond what you can see, far beyond the barrel of your gun, so to speak. And it made me think a little bit about what sort of things that I want to achieve in life and what sort of things people should achieve. But before I jump into that, there was a quote in the Ruskin book actually that really pertained to this whole idea. Let's see, I've written down a couple mysterious page numbers here, unlabeled, of course. Thank you very much. Where is it? Let's see. Is it on? This might take me a second. I should have written these down, but I didn't have my notebook yet, so I was not able to do that. What was I even going on about a minute ago? That just goes to show. Okay, it's not on that page. Maybe it's on this page. ... Okay, I think it's this. Here we go. I think this is really taking me an embarrassingly long time. I don't know if this was the quote that I was thinking about, because now I've kind of forgotten what my train of thought was, but this quote is equally as valuable, so I will read it out anyways. Who that has one spark of feeling for what is beautiful or true would not turn to be refreshed by the pure and extended realizations of modern art? How many have we, how various in their aim and sphere, embracing one by one every feeling and lesson of the creation. David Cox, a painter, presumably, I don't actually know who that is, whose pencil never falls but in dew, simple-minded as a child, gentle and loving all things that are pure and lowly, content to be quiet among the rustling leaves, the sparkling grass, and purple cushioned heather, only to watch the soft white clouds melting with their own motion, and the dewy blue dropping through them like rain, so that he may but cast from him as pollution all that is proud and artificial and unquiet and worldly, and possess his spirit in humility and peace. So that was actually the quote that I was looking for, thank goodness. But essentially what it's saying, because that's a little bit dense to get from reading, I think, so reading out loud, he's saying that this artist was not just seeking to imitate the natural world. He was not just seeking to paint what people thought was the most important. Instead, he was painting the things that were quiet and lowly, like the dew on the grass or the clouds and the rain. And in this time when this man was painting, those things were considered subordinate to painting. Like what you would paint if you wanted to make money and be seen as really successful is you would paint like Aristotle or something from history painting. But this guy, he's describing like a landscape or a still life. And he was saying that in painting that quiet humility, but by doing it from a spirit of trying to create something beautiful and trying to create something that speaks to the senses, he was doing something more elevated. Because first, he was humbling himself by not creating the big flashy painting. Second, he was creating something that could be, beautifully contemplated, even if it didn't seem that technically impressive. So again, kind of humbling himself, showing humility. Third, he wasn't adding anything that was ostentatious, so unnecessary, which made his whole painting have this air of gentleness, peacefulness, and humility. And instead of, it wasn't a worldly piece. It wasn't something that was meant to inspire you to be like, oh, I need to go out and I need to buy this or that, or I need to participate in, the vices of the world by, gambling, or I need to go be a great man that conquers foreign distant lands. It just inspired you to sit and to think about the beauty of nature and the labor wrought by the hands that created that image. And, even though the beaker, you could construe that as something, maybe worldly, because it is a worldly decoration by definition. It's unnecessary. It's just something pretty to kind of have in your room and to kind of delight your senses every day. But I think it still counts as something pure and humble in its creation, because the man that made this beaker, or I'm most likely a man because given the time period, but sure, woman, whoever made this beaker, was not doing so with the intent of, oh, this is gonna get me famous, or oh, I'm gonna get big off of this. And despite that, they still put their best imagination into it and try to create something as pleasant as possible, and their best, obviously, technical effort into it, as it's lasted 2,000 years, maybe with some restoration and luck, environmental luck, but still, if you make something flimsy, it's not gonna last 2,000 years. And that is a very worthy thing. And that immediately instills the work with so many different beautiful qualities to contemplate and to inspire you throughout your day and your life. And I think that's important. I think those are the sort of things that we should be putting behind glass cases. And just to finish off, maybe to, you could disagree with everything I've said so far, and that's fine, because I'm about to talk about a totally different topic as a closing comment anyhow. But the way that Ruskin writes about art, you really, if you have the time and you're interested, especially if there are any art history freaks out there watching it like me, you should read Ruskin. You should read Ruskin if you're a writer. You should read Ruskin if you love beautiful things. You should read Ruskin if you, if you can read, you should read him, because we need more people that seize upon other people's ideas of beauty and execution of beauty and execution of imagination and write about them like that. I mean, that imagery right there, because it is in the consumer's best interest to elevate those beautiful, humble things in the same way that Ruskin did with that writing. Who else, in that time period would have looked at that painting of the grass and decided to write about it, saying things about, you know, fitful sun gleams and purple cushioned heather, and talking about how, you know, the clouds were melting into each other, lost in half light and half in vapor. That's an exaltation of that work. And we should exalt one another's best efforts if they have good execution. And honestly, I'm just gonna go outright and say it. We need to start looking at art or looking at things in the world, looking at things that people have created and writing about them like that or talking about them like that to elevate their qualities that might be overlooked because it doesn't align with, you know, what our culture says is important in this moment. And it's also, I think, important to go out and to write about nature as a whole like that. You know, so I urge you, whoever you are, to go out today and to spend some time writing or trying to write something exalting the nature you see around you or the architecture you see around you, because every single thing that you see around you is a product of imagination. If it's, you know, whether that be human imagination or God's imagination, and if you spend some time exalting it, I think you'll find that you appreciate it more and that you can be fully brought to find beauty in the quiet humility of life and pleasure in the quiet humility of life, which is one of the greater things to aspire to, in my opinion. You know, being able to take a walk and be fully entertained by the birds that you pass along the way or something picturesque like that is a quality that we could all use a little bit more of today. Maybe I'll go into why I think that is another time, but I think it's convincing enough left on its own. Tell me if you think otherwise. And yeah, I hope that you all like that beaker. And maybe as I proceed to read this more, I'll have to do a full video about it.